Hello everyone. My name is Ramya Gunda and I would like to present my semester projects of environmental toxicology, and I have selected two topics on this on environmental toxicology semester project. In that I would like to discuss my first topic, that is the chromium 6, that is a hexavalent chromium exposure, and evaluating the health consequences in human beings and its environmental effects. In this, first I would like to give a brief discussion on this hexavalent chromium toxicity exposure. In this introduction, what I would like to discuss in this as this hexavalent, this is an highly toxic and industrial chemical, which is released in the industrial processes like electroplating, dye production, and stainless steel manufacturing. In all these industrial management processes, and uh, uh, and I would like to compare these with the non-toxic chemical chromium, like which is the trivalent. When trivalent is very benign, it is not that toxic when compared to the hexavalent chromium, which is released as an industrial byproducts during processing in these industries. So this is and in this I can give the overview how this damages the cell, and how it damages the DNA, and affects the human health, and leads to the environmental protection, and everything else I am gonna discuss in this. And I would like to discuss how we can regulate this and how we can prevent these exposure also by taking the certain measures or strategies to prevent this exposure. And as an historically, I have seen that there is an context. I have found that this chromium exposure have already done in this US, that is in Hinkley area, California. This in Hinkley area, actually the people by drinking the contaminated water get exposed to this chromium toxicity. So mm, and they got many health effects, and but the strategies regulations was taken by environmental protection agencies. So they limit that exposure later by diagnosing that limits, and by diagnosing in by diagnosing that toxic levels, and by regulating all this, that was controlled in that California. And I would like to discuss how it get exposed, and how people we can diagnose it, and how we can control and regulate it mainly. And this chromium exposure can be identified and measured in these ways. That is, first, it is mainly contaminated. First, by this chromium exposure is mainly affected to contaminated air, food and water, and through thermal contact also. So we can in environment by food, contaminated food and water, air. But in industries like electroplating, stainless steel welding, and there the workers also get exposed to by these industrial processings. Uh, so by taking the biomedical, how can I measure this? Like this, by contaminating air, soil, by industrial processes, this we get exposure to this hexavalent chromium. And how can we identify this? We can by having the techniques like biomonitoring, typical biomonitoring techniques, by taking collecting the samples by the urine samples, blood samples, and collecting the levels of this chromium. And we can check in the humans, we can check like that. For environmental monitoring, like air, soil, and water sampling, we can collect these samples, and we'll get to know how the environment exposure to these chromium levels. And like this, by collecting all these, by diagnosing all these measures, by monitoring, we can contact to the regulatory agencies like EPA, like, environmental protection agencies, or by a if it affects to the industries with any workers, we can contact, we can um, establish with the agencies like OSHA, occupational safety management, regulatory management. We can contact this and we can reduce this. So we have to know the deep knowledge of this. So uh, deep knowledge of how this biological mechanism and how it affects the clinical effects and how environmental is affected. So I would like to discuss that in deep. So this chromium toxin will enters into the body through inhalation or ingestion, through contaminated food and water or skin contact. So it enters into the cell membrane, and there it will similarity to the sulfate and the phosphate ions. It first enters into the cell membrane. From cell membrane, it causes the oxidative damage, oxidative stress, and go and bind to the DNAs, and it will DNA damage. It mainly do the DNA damage and affects the liver, kidney also, and its skin. It causes skin ulcers and respiratory illness, and GI problems is also there, and like this, it affects to these roots and goes and damage cell membrane and organ damage, and like this many effects will be there. And clinically, when you see clinically, the humans will have. mm DNA damage, mainly genotoxicity will be there. That is the main important. We have to be reported this, and the health effects mainly skin. When it contact with the skin, it causes the chrome holes. And respiratory diseases like bronchitis, wheezings, and sinusitis will be there. With GI gut damage will be there, and mostly vulnerable population like pregnancy and children's will affect, and they will have the reproductive problems also will be there, and neurological effects are seen. And we have to take care about the vulnerable people, where the children, elders, and immunocompromised people will be there. We have to take care of them, and we have to control all this by educating the community safety, and educating how it's exposed, how we can control its exposure levels. So we have to educate the community people, and we have to regulate all these levels, and so that we can decrease this health impacts on the humans. Now we can see a look on the environmental effects of chromium. That is the this chromium is long lived in the environment, which is released from the industrial processings. So it can contaminate groundwater, it can contaminate water, and it can contaminate soil. By contaminating the water, we have the toxic levels will remain decades also. So we have to infiltrate the wells and expose the exposed entire communities. We have to take care of them, and it also contaminates the soils by disturbing the microbes. All these we have to take care of that agriculture collapse, and by contaminating the aquatic life, that is the fish, amphibians, and they will disturb the ecosystems and will contaminate the air also. That is the most everyday environmental hazards. That is, we have to take care of this, and we have to establish some regulations for the environment exposures, and we have to control it. And main is regulation. How we can regulate this and how we can control this chromium exposure is that first we have to present the what we have to present OSHA limits. That is the in industrial workplace workers, we have to establish some exposure limits to the 5 micrograms per cubic meters over 8 hours. And with the environmental protection agencies, drinking water limitations like up to 100 ppb total chromium. So for soil, air, and everything, that cleanup efforts by chemical reduction, soil washing, and bioremediation, all we have to do this. And after that, cleaning programs we have to establish, an environmental justice, environmental cleaning programs is most important, and educating the communities is most important. And we have to establish the strict regulations and community empowerment to achieve the lasting protection, and equity is very important for this regulations and mitigation of this chromium exposure. And by taking all these measures, we can control this. I would like to conclude my topic of chromium exposure that it is not only the industrial pollutant to the working workers, but it is an public health risk and environmental. It affects the public health and both environment also. So it is we have to take a drastic step on this chromium exposure to control it. So and I would like to introduce my second topic. What I choose in my semester project is toxicological effects of manganese in occupational settings, and I would like to focus mainly on the welding occupational settings. That is the welding occupational settings as like my second topic I would like to present is manganese in welding occupation, and I would like to give a brief introduction. What I would like to discuss in this topic is how the welders got by working in the welding by dangerous fumes, the exposure to the manganese levels. So they get inhaled and go to the reaches to the brain, and main effects are to the nervous systems to the workers working in the welding occupational settings. So I would like to discuss about that, and in the history, and within the history I have a knowledge of that to explain that this welding is after World War II, the welders are affected, but before World War II, in 19th centuries, the miners are most affected with this manganese toxicities, and they will have the symptoms like tremors and cognitive dysfunctions similar to the Parkinson's disease. So that I have discussed, which is very interesting, and but that is also reduced also. But now mostly the welder workers are mostly exposed to these manganese toxicities. We have to and we have to know how this is exposed to this manganese toxicity, and how we can control this is okay. Mostly I have discussed earlier that working in the welding fumes, they get exposed to these manganese, and at first levels they will through fumes as a minor particles they enters into the respiratory system. So, as a respiratory system and lungs are first affected, and chronic exposure, it will reaches to the brain and their brain. It will affect to the nervous system, and it will reaches to the brain and causes nervous system is affected finally when they are chronically repeatedly exposure to the manganese. And I would like to share my knowledge how this manganese reaches to the brain and what symptoms it cause, and how the environment is also affected, and how can we control is what after it reaches to the brain. The welders who are exposed to these manganese fumes Mm, has they have your neurological symptoms like tremors will be there, and their movement stiffness and the conscious matter all will get slow downs. Their mood will changes, and mainly we will see the brain problems. The symptoms are which are very similar to that Parkinson's disease. So we have to control all these. Not only these neurological effects, the workplace, not the workplace is contaminated, means environment is contaminated, that is the air, soil, water is contaminated with this, and with this manganese. So even a fine particle also will damage us to the respiratory system and the nervous system. With chronic exposures we have to take care of that and with the nervous system effect, it may be the irreversible damage also. So we can't treat that patients when they reaches to the nervous system. So we have to take care of it. And I would like to say that this manganese toxicity, the people who are vulnerable to these toxicity are mostly the children and the elder people. So we have to check the levels of this manganese. Mm, Through MRIs and neurophysiological testing in these vulnerable people like children and the adults. By checking these manganese levels, we are able to control it before where they exposed when that reaches to the respiratory system. not beyond that reaching your nervous system. We can control by checking these manganese levels by MRI scanning and neurophysiological testings and blood levels. So we can control this before only when reaching to the chronic level exposure. So for that diagnosis like blood levels we can check. Um, so we can control by educating them all these and control. I would like to say control measures like environmental protection agency should develop exposure limits to the manganese toxicity and by establishment of personal protective equipment for the workers who are working in the welding. And not only that, the engineering controls like local exhaust ventilation should be should be established, and personal permissible exposure limit should be 5 mg for or cubic meter. I have to say that should be established, and workplace monitoring level should be established, and training and awareness for the workers, so that they can take care of their health. We have to give some knowledge for the workers, so that at initial stage only they get to know about these exposure toxicities, and we can able to detect them, and so we, how this mechanism will occur, so how the symptoms, what are the symptoms look like with Parkinson's disease. If they are attacked with Parkinson's disease, we have to educate the owners so that we can reduce these toxicity levels at early stage. And finally, I would like to conclude my second topic, that is the manganese toxicity in occupational settings layers. Mainly, it is an urge because nervous system, when affected, it may be untreatable. So, at initial stages only, we have to make a diagnosis levels. We have to make a health surveillance test. We have to done, and community exposure and testing of the vulnerable people, and strong regulations, enhancing the workplace practices and health monitoring, which we have to protect both workers' health and environmental, also surrounding population also, because these are irreversible neurological effects will be there. And by going through these two topics, I have gained a deep knowledge how these toxic levels will affect, these chemicals will affect biologically to a human health and environment. And thank you very much.